Chapter 2. Criminal Violence and Electromagnetic Fields. Question: can criminal behavior be induced? In 2013, the CIA declassified an obscure book from the early 1960s called The Adam and Eve Story: The History of Cataclysms by Thomas Chan. The version published by the CIA, as available on Amazon, is heavily redacted. I looked for uncensored versions back then but didn't find any. Then, much later, I noticed that uncensored versions are floating around the internet. I think I found the part they wanted censored. The rest of the book seems uninteresting. I have always learned the most in life by studying the things someone has tried to censor. This is worth the listen. They put a batch full of mice, all genetically of the same strain, in aluminum cylinders about 6 inches or so in diameter, half in a magnetic field environment the same we live in, the other half in a magnetic field environment equivalent to being halfway between the Earth and our Moon. Both sets of cylinders have the same physical environment, the same number of male and female mice, the same food, the same lighting, the same play environment, and the same water supply. After 3 months, the mice in the low-density cylinders all suffered the same effects. First, they all simply came apart, all in their protein structure. And second, over 35% suffered visible cancers, which could be considered head to toe. No analysis was made of internal cancers. They hoped I could help them with reasons for these results, which disturbed them. The first thing they told me was that the mice turned criminal in their low-density magnetic field environment. Criminal? I exclaimed. How in the dickens do you tell when a mouse turns criminal? I asked. Very simple, was the answer. There are basic end cruelties for almost all mammals. Mice and humans are no exception. Cannibalism is the ultimate cruelty, and they turned cannibalistic. Even though they had plenty of the same food as the mice in the normal magnetic field strength cylinders, they indulged in cannibalism as a preference. The mice in the normal cylinders treated each other normally and ate only their normal food. And he paused for a moment. There's another thing which really confounds us, he continued. These same mice who turned cannibalistic indulged in forcible rape, literally around the clock. That and murder are the other end cruelties. Is it possible that you can tell the difference between rape and forcible rape in mice? I asked. It seems impossible to differentiate in mice. Oh yes, he said. It happens all the time in the animal world. For instance, sea lions and sea elephants. They use forcible rape commonly. In these mice, almost every act of sexual intercourse in the low-density cylinders was forcible rape, whereas in the normal cylinders, we never saw it. Of course, we must assume it may have happened when we weren't looking. Of course, in humans, it's easy to differentiate between forcible rape and rape, I offered. He replied, legally it may not be so easy to differentiate, but morally I guess it is easy. But what we're interested in here is why they resorted to forcible rape just because of the environment of a low-density magnetic field. We were hoping you could give us at least a concept to go on. I told him that my work did involve the study of legends concerning civilizations in the years leading to cataclysms, when the Earth's magnetic field was decreasing at an increasing rate as they approached the null zone. And in every instance it appeared that criminality, essentially man's inhumanity to man, appeared to become overwhelming. Even the Navajo Indians spoke of it in their legend, of their approach to a cataclysm, but they called it adultery. It is quite possible that their definition of rape in any form, be it forcible or not, was included in the term adultery. End quote. I found that in Scribd.com. The document was called Chan Thomas, The Adam and Eve Story Text. I looked for these passages in the declassified, sanitized version of the book, but didn't find them there. It's clear why this quote-unquote agency would keep this kind of information for themselves. If true, then cancer, murder, rape, and even cannibalism correlate to a reduced magnetic field. This reminds me of the premise in my book Levels of Energy, where I say that low-energy states are the primary cause of crime and violence. When a sentient being is depleted of energy, they resort to harming other beings. Harmlessness is a telltale sign of higher energy. The greatest power is the gentlest. Those with the least power are the most violent. The reason it was censored may derive from the inconvenient fact that these states can be induced externally, just like they were induced on the mice who turned into violent rapists and cannibals. Someone knowing how to manipulate magnetic fields could target human beings. That sounds like the type of thing the agency would be interested in. Which raises the question, would we be defenseless against a weakening of the magnetic field? Could a sinister use of technology convert us into zombies? Could such experimentation be the cause of cases of mass hysteria and sudden outbreaks of mass violence? Magnetic resonance is defined as the excitation of particles in a magnetic field by exposure to electromagnetic radiation of a specific frequency. In other words, external influence is possible. But I don't believe we are defenseless because we carry an electromagnetic field of our own. The higher our energy level, the less likely we are to be influenced. Many have violent thoughts, but don't act upon them. They have enough energy left for self-control and not to harm others. Or if they are energy depleted, they've had training in ethics or morals. It's the greatest act of love when the wolf doesn't eat the lamb. The greatest act of love when the energy depleted don't lash out at others. This can be consciously practiced. For example, when I arrive home after playing tennis in the baking sun for 5 hours, I am energy depleted and in need of rest, water, and food. In the past, while in this state, I would prefer to be left alone, trying to avoid conversation. But recently, my practice has been to stay charming, patient, friendly, and forthcoming, despite the exhausted state. And I've succeeded. It is possible, as a matter of intention. Even so, nobody can thrive in a long-term depleted state. Like a fish needs water and a plant needs soil, a human being needs a connection to spiritual source to thrive. The more disconnected from source, the more desperate the attempts to derive energy. But for the connected, life is joyful. Everything has its energy field. The earth has its field. A human being generates his own field. Your own heart generates EMF that radiates around you so that people can feel you, and it is much stronger than your brain's energy emission. Here are 2 perspectives on the electromagnetic spectrum. These are taken from images in the book. On a scale of frequency, from low to high, things like power lines and computer monitors operate in lower frequencies, say 60 to 100 Hz for computers, 50 to 60 Hz for power lines. Then, television and radio broadcasts occupy a slightly higher band in the megahertz and kilohertz ranges. Things like mobile phones, smart monitors, Wi-Fi, remote controls, and microwaves are in the higher gigahertz range. Then, as we move from gigahertz to exahertz toward the highest range of the scale, we transcend visible light, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, and then ultimately radioactive waste at the highest end of the scale. These images can be found in the book or were taken from the National Institute of Health and from the National Cancer Institute. So is there a correlation between weakened magnetic fields and crime? Let's have a look at geomagnetic fields. Geomagnetic fields and homicide rates. There are two images in the book showing the Earth's geomagnetic fields, which are weaker in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. One image comes from undark.org. If you search the term spinning magnet, shows the higher fields in red tapering down to the lower fields in blue, and a brilliant color map can be found by searching the images under the search term Geomagnetic Fields Color Map. The highest magnetic fields radiate out from the poles. In the northern hemisphere, the strongest would be over Siberia, Russia. The next highest would be areas including Iceland, Greenland, and northern Canada. These high geomagnetic fields extend down to around the 33rd parallel. From there to the equator is shown as a mid-level of geomagnetic field. The lowest geomagnetic field would be an oval shape encompassing South America and most parts of western and southern Africa. The highest geomagnetic field in the southern hemisphere extends from Antarctica north to cover most of Australia. These images are worth searching either in the book or online to get a mental picture. If it is true that a weakened magnetic field creates higher crime, then it should be reflected in worldwide homicide rates. So I went to check, and sure enough, the places with the weakest natural magnetic fields, South America and Western and Southern Africa, as mentioned, have the highest homicide rates. I say correlation because it's unknown which came first, the weakening of the field or the crimes. And please note, I'm not saying that this is an excuse for crime, only that people in these regions might have to do a little more to protect their own energy field. A Wikipedia entry on biomagnetism says this, quoting, "Animals, including birds and turtles, can detect the Earth's magnetic field and use the field to navigate during migration. Some researchers have found that cows and wild deer tend to align their bodies north-south while relaxing, but not when the animals are under high-voltage power lines, suggesting that magnetism is responsible. Very weak electromagnetic fields disrupt the magnetic compass used by European robins and other songbirds, which use the Earth's magnetic field to navigate." End quote. And then, searching magnetoreception in Wikipedia, that article goes into greater detail. I am certain that an animal's abilities to detect magnetic fields also applies to humans. We say, "I can feel it in the air tonight," "There's something in the air," or "to clear the air," or "There's a negative atmosphere in that room," or "She has a positive aura," etc. These describe shifts in people's energy fields. Free energy. One result of geomagnetism is what is known as telluric currents. To quote from Wikipedia's article on telluric, a telluric current, or earth current, is an electric current which moves underground or through the sea. Telluric currents result from both natural causes and human activity, and the discrete currents interact in a complex pattern. The currents are extremely low frequency and travel over large areas at or near the surface of the Earth. The strongest are primarily geomagnetically induced currents, which are induced by changes in the outer part of the Earth's magnetic field, which are usually caused by interactions between the solar wind and the magnetosphere, or solar radiation effects on the ionosphere. Telluric currents flow in the surface layers of the Earth. The electric potential on the Earth's surface can be measured at different points, enabling the calculation of the magnitudes and directions of the telluric currents and hence the Earth's conductance. Both telluric and magnetotelluric methods are used for exploring the structure beneath the Earth's surface, such as in industrial prospecting. For mineral exploration, the targets are any subsurface structures with a distinguishable resistance in comparison to its surroundings. Uses include geothermal exploration, mining exploration, petroleum exploration, mapping of fault zones, groundwater exploration and monitoring, investigation of magma chambers, and investigation of boundaries of tectonic plates. Earth batteries tap a useful low-voltage current from telluric currents and were used for telegraph systems as far back as the 1840s. In industrial prospecting activity that uses the telluric current method, electrodes are properly located on the ground to sense the voltage difference between locations caused by the oscillatory telluric currents. It is recognized that a low-frequency window, an LFW, exists when telluric currents pass through the Earth's substrata. In the frequencies of the LFW, the Earth acts as a conductor." End quote. Again, the source of that article is Wikipedia. The article is entitled Telluric Current. The Earth itself has magnetic fields and electric currents that can be used for all kinds of industrial purposes. I was surprised to read that the Earth's free energy was used for telegraph systems in the 1840s. I'm reminded of the Carrington event in 1851, in which two radio operators, one in Boston and one in Portland, realized they could use a geomagnetic storm to communicate for free. Quoting, "Some telegraph lines seem to have been able to produce a sufficient geomagnetically induced current from the electromagnetic field to allow for continued communication with the telegraph operator power supplies switched off." The following conversation occurred between two operators of the American Telegraph line between Boston, Massachusetts, and Portland, Maine, on the night of September 2, 1859, and was reported in the Boston Evening Traveler. This is the Boston operator to the Portland operator. "Please cut off your battery power source entirely for 15 minutes. Portland operator: "Will do so. It is now disconnected." Boston: "Mine is disconnected, and we are working with the auroral current. How do you receive my writing?" Portland: "Better than with our batteries on. Current comes and goes gradually." Boston: "My current is very strong at times, and we can work better without the batteries, as the aurora seems to neutralize and augment our batteries alternatively, making current too strong at times for our relay magnets. Suppose we work without batteries while we are affected by this trouble." Portland: "Very well. Shall I go ahead with business?" Boston: "Yes, go ahead." The conversation was carried on for around 2 hours using no battery power at all, and working solely with the current induced by the aurora. End quote. And that source is Wikipedia, Carrington event. Now, if your jaws are not wide open by now, you are not paying attention. I am sure your electricity and battery companies would like to discourage research into this kind of thing. There is a belief among proponents of alternate history that in the old days there was a worldwide free energy system that used the Earth's currents, and that cathedrals, domes, and antennas atop buildings were made to pick up on that energy. There's also the idea that prior to a great cataclysm or reset, humans go insane and start murdering, raping, and cannibalizing each other. Some say that's why there were cataclysms. They are made intentionally to clean up the mess. Others say these are merely side effects of the great Earth changes and also changes in Earth's magnetic field. Some spiritualists believe that there are ley lines crisscrossing, circling, and spiraling through the land, and that these lines, connected by certain ancient buildings, megaliths, monoliths, mounds, and caverns, carry either helpful or harmful telluric currents. There are people who have their houses destroyed because they are perched on negative ley lines. I know some who buy and sell real estate based on ley lines. And then there are people who have sex at certain spots because they believe they are on positive ley line convergences. I personally haven't chosen real estate based on ley lines or done any other activity based upon them, but I do know some people who do. Is a weakened electromagnetic field linked to crime? I believe so. Arguably, the harming of others is not done out of rage or cruelty. It is a misguided attempt to derive life force. In some ancient cultures, cannibalism was used to capture the deceased person's life force. Eating the heart was thought to improve one's own heart. Eating the brain was supposed to improve one's intelligence. The purpose of some forms of ritual cannibalism was to force entry to higher realms of consciousness. It is believed that a newly deceased person is still attached to their body while they are ascending to higher realms, and by eating their flesh right after they died, one can catch a glimpse of heaven. This strange custom is reported among the Australian Aborigines, for example. Murder can also be seen as an attempt to capture life force, even if the murderer is not consciously aware of it. In the moment of killing, the etheric and astral body of a person shatters, with bits and pieces often getting stuck to the murderer. I'll explain this in a future book. And rape is an energy vampirism, where one forces an exchange they would not normally attract or deserve. All crime is arguably an attempt to recharge a depleted battery. That's why you get charged with a crime and locked in a cell. And small crimes are also an attempt to gain energy that you have lost through your disconnection from source. If you steal money, you are trying to compensate for the inability to magnetically attract any. Thus, what we consider good relates to high energy, and bad relates to low energy. So raise your energy by using my books Increase Your Energy or Levels of Energy as a starting point. Both are also available on audio.